The Galactic Concord had ruled the galaxy for 11,000 years. 12 of the most powerful species sat on its council, making decisions that affected billions of lives across thousands of worlds. They met in a great chamber made of living crystal on a world called Nexus Prime. The chamber floated in a pocket of space that existed between dimensions, hidden from everyone who was not invited. No one had ever found this place without permission. No one had ever dared to try. On this day, the council had gathered to discuss a problem. The problem was called humanity. High Arbiter Velkath of the Dralith Imperium rose from his seat. His body was long and serpent-like, covered in scales that shifted colors with his mood. Right now, they were a deep, angry red. He looked around at his fellow council members and began to speak. 300 years, he said, his voice echoing through the crystal chamber. That is all the time these creatures have had since they discovered faster-than-light travel. 300 years, and already they infest 47 star systems. They breed like insects. They adapt to worlds that should kill them. They make friends with species we have deliberately kept apart. He paused, letting his words sink in. Worst of all, Velkath continued, they refused to kneel. The other council members shifted in their seats. They knew what he meant. Every species that had ever encountered the Galactic Concord eventually learned their place. Some took decades. Some took centuries. But in the end, they all submitted. They paid their tributes. They followed the rules. They accepted that the council knew best, but not the human's ambassador. Thessaly Vorn of the Kishari Dominion clicked her mandibles in agreement. She was a towering creature that looked like an insect made of black armor and sharp edges. Her species had served as the council's enforcers for 3,000 years. When a species needed to be reminded of their place, the Kishari were sent to teach them. My spies have brought disturbing reports, Thessaly Vorn said. The humans are taking apart our shield technology and learning how it works. They are teaching combat tactics to the Relary, a species we have kept as servants for 5,000 years. They are asking questions about council history. They want to know about species that no longer exist. They want to know about wars that have been erased from all records. A murmur of concern spread through the chamber. Counselor Thane of the Meridian Collective pulsed with agitation. Thane was not made of flesh and blood. Thane was a being of pure energy, contained within a geometric crystal that allowed others to see and communicate with them. The Meridian Collective could see possible futures, though these visions were never certain. We have run probability calculations, Thane said, their voice like chimes in wind. If humans are allowed to continue on their current path, there is a 73% chance they will destabilize our control over the outer systems within 2 centuries. There is a 41% chance they will discover the truth about the silence within 5 centuries. The chamber went cold at the mention of the silence. It was not something the council spoke of openly. It was not something anyone spoke of. The silence was what happened to species that became too much of a problem. It was clean. It was quiet. And afterward, no one remembered the species had ever existed at all. Velkath smiled, showing teeth that were longer than a human finger. Then we are in agreement. Humanity is a threat that must be dealt with before they become impossible to control. He raised his clawed hand. I call for a vote. I propose we classify humanity as a Tier 0 threat and invoke the Dominion Protocol. The Dominion Protocol was an old law, rarely used. It allowed the Council to take complete control of a species before that species became a true danger. It meant the end of human independence. It meant human worlds would be occupied. Human leaders would be replaced with council puppets. Human children would be taught that they were lesser beings, meant to serve their betters. It had been done before, many times. It had always worked. The vote began. One by one, the 12 representatives made their choice. The Dralith Imperium voted yes. The Kishari Dominion voted yes. The Meridian Collective, despite their gift for seeing futures, voted yes. The Vorn Hegemony, the Crystal Minds, the Stellar Communion, the Deep Ones, the Light Weavers, the Stone Speakers, the Void Dancers, the Dream Keepers, and the Memory Lords all voted yes. The vote was unanimous. Velkath allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The Council's combined fleets would arrive at Earth in 3 standard cycles. Humanity's brief, chaotic moment in galactic history would end the same way so many others had ended. They would learn to kneel. They would learn to serve. And in a few generations, they would forget they had ever been free. "It is decided," Velkoth announced. "The Dominion Protocol is now in effect. Humanity will be brought under Council control. Any resistance will be met with appropriate force." The Council members began to rise from their seats, already planning their part in the coming subjugation, already dividing up human space and human resources among themselves. Then the great crystalline doors of the chamber made a sound they had never made before. They groaned. They creaked. They shuddered in their ancient frames, and then impossibly they opened. Every eye, every sensor, every perception turned toward the entrance. The doors had not been commanded to open. No one had been invited. This place existed outside normal space, protected by 17 layers of encryption and 3 separate reality gates. Finding it should have been impossible. Opening those doors should have been even more impossible. But someone had done both. 3 figures stepped into the chamber. They were human. The first was an older woman. With gray and white hair and eyes that seemed to hold the weight of stars, she wore no uniform, no royal robes, no insignia of any kind. Just simple gray clothing that somehow looked more important than any fancy dress. The second was a young man, barely an adult by human standards. He carried an old leather bag over his shoulder and looked around the great chamber with open curiosity. He did not look afraid. He looked interested. The third was a soldier. That much was obvious from the way she stood, the way she moved. The way her eyes scanned the room and found every exit, every threat, every possible danger. She stayed slightly behind the other 2, her body ready for violence if violence became necessary. "Hi, Arbiter." Velkoth recovered from his shock first. His scales flashed bright red with anger, and he opened his mouth to speak. But the older woman spoke first. "Hello," she said. And her voice carried easily through the vast chamber, without any amplification, without any effort. "My name is Dr. Helena Cross. I am the director of the Human Continuity Council. And we need to talk about that vote you just made." For a long moment, no one in the council chamber moved. No one spoke. The 12 most powerful beings in the galaxy simply stared at the 3 humans who had done the impossible. "Hi," Arbiter Velkoth found his voice first. His scales had shifted from red to a dangerous black, the color of pure rage. "You dare?" he began. "My name is Dr. Helena Cross," the older woman repeated, as if she had not heard him. "This is Marcus Chen, our cultural liaison. And this is Colonel Sarah Okonkwo, who insisted on coming despite my assurances that violence would be unnecessary. Ambassador Thessaly Vorn rose to her full height, towering over the humans like a mountain of black armor. Her mandibles clicked together with a sound like knives sharpening. "You have walked into the heart of galactic power with 3 individuals. 3. My personal guards could tear you apart before you took another breath. I have killed species for lesser insults than this." Dr. Kraus tilted her head slightly, studying the massive insectoid, with something that looked almost like pity. "Could they, Ambassador?" "Here, in this chamber." Thessaly Vorn hesitated. "This is the sacred chamber of the Galactic Concord," Dr. Cross continued. "Violence within these walls is forbidden by laws that were written before your species learned to walk upright. Your own ancestors helped write those laws, Ambassador. Or have you forgotten the 3rd compact? Section 7, paragraph 12, which states that any act of violence within the council chamber results in immediate expulsion from the Concord itself." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush stone. "You are bluffing," Velkoth hissed. "You cannot possibly know our laws. Those texts are kept in sealed vaults, protected by the young man Marcus Chen." Opened his leather bag and pulled out a small data tablet. He began to read aloud, and his voice was not speaking any human language. He was speaking High Dralith, the ancient tongue of Velkoth's own species, a language that had been dead for 6,000 years. A language that existed only in the most secret archives of the Dralith, impround. He quoted the founding compact word for word. He cited the 300 reforms, including 3 that had been deliberately erased from official history. He referenced a legal ruling from 6,000 years ago that established the sanctity of the council chamber, a ruling that even Velkoth himself had forgotten. When he finished, he looked up with a small smile. I hope my pronunciation was acceptable. I only had a few decades to practice. Dr. Cross watched the council members with calm, knowing eyes. Your records are not as secret as you believe, she said softly, and we have been paying attention for much longer than you realize. Counselor Thane pulsed with something that might have been fear. Energy beings were difficult to read, but their crystal container was vibrating at frequencies that suggested deep distress. How long? They demanded. How long have you known about the council? Dr. Cross smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting a very long time for this moment. We have known since before you voted to exterminate the Alani, she said. Since before you strip-mined the Forgotten Reaches and called it an accident? Since before you erased the memory of the Builders from your own history and told yourselves they never existed? The council members exchanged looks of shock and horror. The Alani, the Forgotten Reaches, the Builders. These were names that had been carefully removed from every database, every archive, every memory. No one outside the council should have known them. No one. Impossible, Velkoth whispered. The Builders have been dead for 10,000 years. We made certain that no record of them survived. You made certain that no record you controlled survived, Dr. Cross corrected. But the Builders were clever. They knew what you were planning. They knew they could not stop you. So they did something else instead. They hid. They waited. And when humanity began to look up at the stars, they found us. She let that sink in. Humanity did not stumble upon faster-than-light travel through luck or genius, she continued. We were given it. By someone who remembered exactly what this council is. Someone who wanted to make sure that you would never again be able to destroy a species without consequences. The chamber erupted into chaos. Council members shouted over each other. Accusations flew like weapons. Thessaly Vorn demanded that her guards be called despite the laws that forbade it. Velkoth's scales cycled through color so fast he looked like a living rainbow of fury. Through it all, 3 humans stood perfectly still. Colonel Okonkwo had not moved since they entered. She had not spoken a word, but her eyes had never stopped watching, never stopped calculating. She had identified 16 potential threats in the room. She had planned responses to each one. She was ready, but she did not think she would need to fight. Not today. Eventually, the chaos began to subside. The council members were powerful beings, leaders of species that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. They had not achieved their positions by losing control. One by one, they returned to their seats. High Arbiter Velkoth, scales finally settled on a cold, calculating blue. He looked at Dr. Cross with new eyes. She was not what he had expected. None of this was what he had expected. What do you want? He asked finally. Dr. Cross nodded, as if he had passed some kind of test. I want to have a conversation, she said. A real one. Not the kind you usually have with species you consider beneath you. I want to talk about what you have done, what you are planning to do, and what happens next. And if we refuse to talk? Thessaly Vorn asked. Her voice was quieter now, more cautious. She was beginning to understand that something had changed. The rules she had lived by for 3,000 years might not apply anymore. Marcus Chen looked up from his tablet. You won't refuse, he said, with simple confidence. You're curious? All of you. You've spent 11,000 years being the most powerful beings in the galaxy. You've never met anyone who wasn't afraid of you. He smiled, and for a moment, he looked much older than his years. We're not afraid of you, he said, and that terrifies you more than any weapon ever could. Velkoth wanted to deny it. Thessaly Vorn wanted to crush this impudent child beneath her claws. Counselor Thane wanted to calculate the probability of this being some elaborate trick. But they did none of these things, because the human was right, for the first time, in 11,000 years. The Galactic Council was afraid, and they had no idea what to do about it. Dr. Kraus seemed to sense the shift in the room. She clasped her hands behind her back and looked at each council member in turn. "We have much to discuss," she said. "The vote you just made. The fleet you are planning to send. The future of 37 billion human lives." She paused. "And the 73 species you have erased from existence over the past 11,000 years? 70-3? The number hung in the air like a death sentence." "Oh yes," Dr. Cross said quietly. "We know about all of them. We have their names. We have their histories. We have their cultures preserved in archives you will never find." Her eyes were cold now, cold as the space between stars. "The question is not whether you will talk with us, counselors. The question is whether you will listen." She gestured to the doors behind her, which still stood impossibly open. "You have time to decide," she said. "We will wait." And with that, the three humans turned and walked out of the council chamber as calmly as they had entered, leaving 12 of the most powerful beings in the galaxy sitting in stunned silence. For the first time in 11,000 years, the council did not know what to do next. The council demanded answers. After 3 hours of arguing among themselves, they finally agreed on one thing. They needed to know what the humans knew. They needed to understand how badly they had been fooled. High Arbiter Velkoth invited Dr. Cross to his private chambers. It was meant to be a power move. These rooms existed in an even more secret layer of space, accessible only to Velkoth himself. By bringing her here, he intended to show that humans were still operating in his territory, on his terms, but when he opened the door, he found Dr. Cross already sitting in his favorite chair, sipping something from a small cup. "Tea," she said calmly, as if his shock was perfectly normal. "I brought it from Earth. Would you like some?" Velkoth stood frozen for a long moment. Then, slowly, he slithered to the seat across from her. There was no point in pretending anymore. Whatever advantage he thought he had was clearly an illusion.
"How?"
He asked simply. Dr. Cross set down her cup. "How did we get here? How did we learn your secrets? How did we prepare for this moment while you believed we were a young, foolish species stumbling through the stars?" "Yes, all of it." She nodded. "Fair enough. You deserve to understand what you are facing."
"Ah!"
And so she told him. Humanity had known about the Galactic Council for 250 years. The Builders, those ancient beings the Council had tried to erase, had not died when the Council destroyed their homeworld. A small group had escaped. They had hidden themselves in the spaces between dimensions, watching, waiting, preserving everything they knew. When humanity began its journey into space, the Builders had found them. They had seen something in humans that reminded them of themselves, something that refused to be controlled, something that asked questions instead of accepting answers. The Builders had given humanity faster than light travel, but more importantly, they had given humanity knowledge. They had shared everything they knew about the Council, every species that had been destroyed, every war that had been hidden, every lie that had been told, and then they had given humanity a warning. "They told us what would happen if the Council discovered what we truly were," Dr. Cross said. "They told us we would be destroyed just like they were, just like 72 other species before them." Velkoth was quiet for a long time. His scales had stopped shifting colors. They were now a dull gray, the color of deep thought. "So you pretended," he said finally.
"Yes."
"For 250 years, we pretended to be exactly what you expected. Young, foolish, reckless. We spread across the galaxy in ways that seemed dangerous but sloppy. We violated your territorial laws in ways that seemed accidental. We befriended species you had isolated because we seemed too naive to know any better. Every action was calculated, every single one. The colonies you thought were mistakes were placed deliberately. The technology we accidentally shared with client species was chosen carefully. The observers you sent to watch us saw exactly what we wanted them to see." Other council members had arrived during this explanation. Thessaly Vorn, Counselor Thane, others who had pushed their way into Velkoth's private space. Too desperate for information to care about protocol. "You built a trap, Thessaly," Vorn said slowly. Her warrior's mind was beginning to understand. "We built a test, Dr. Cross corrected. We needed to know if the Council had changed. If perhaps the species who committed those ancient crimes had evolved beyond them. If maybe, just maybe, you would choose a different path when faced with a species that did not fit your expectations. She paused, and her eyes were sad. You voted to enslave or destroy 37 billion people because we asked too many questions. I believe that answers our test. What do you want? Velkoff asked. His voice was different now. Smaller Colonel Okonkwo spoke for the first time. Her voice was quiet and controlled, but it carried the weight of steel. We have spent 50 years mapping your fleet positions. We know the location of every council shipyard, every weapons depot, every classified installation. We know the patrol schedules of your border forces. We know the maintenance cycles of your capital ships. She let those words settle. We have 17,000 warships. Not the 600 you believe. We have 300 vessels designed specifically to counter Kishari shield frequencies, which we reverse-engineered 4 decades ago. We have weapons based on builder technology that you cannot defend against because you do not understand the science behind them. Thessaly Vorn made a sound that might have been fear. Your combined fleets outnumber ours 3-1, Colonel Okonkwo continued. But we know where they are. We know their weaknesses. We know that 16% of your Kishari captains secretly resent council control. We know that the Meridian Collective has been hiding a schism in their consciousness for 2,000 years. We know which council members have secretly been hoarding resources for themselves. How? Velkath breathed. We listened. We watched. We made friends. The Colonel's expression did not change. Humans are very good at making friends. Dr. Cross raised her hand and the Colonel fell silent. But we are not here to threaten war, Dr. Cross said. War is what you do. War is what turned 12 frightened species into galactic tyrants thousands of years ago. War is the only tool you know how to use. She leaned forward. We are here to offer you something your council has not experienced in 11,000 years. Marcus Chen, who had been quiet until now, looked up from his tablet. Accountability, he said simply. We are offering you a chance to choose something different. The council members looked at each other. They did not understand. In their experience, power was used to dominate. That was simply how the galaxy worked. You either controlled others, or you were controlled by them. The idea that someone might offer them a choice, rather than an ultimatum, was so foreign that they could not process it. Dr. Cross saw their confusion and smiled. It was a sad smile, full of something that might have been pity. We could destroy you, she said gently. We have the means. We have the knowledge. We have allies you do not even know about yet. But destroying you would make us exactly what you are. It would prove that the builders were wrong about us, and it would doom the galaxy to another cycle of the same violence that has repeated for 11,000 years. She stood up, and suddenly she seemed much larger than her small human frame. We are offering you a door, she said. A door that leads somewhere other than destruction. Whether you walk through it is entirely your choice. She picked up her teacup and walked toward the exit. You have 3 days to decide, she said over her shoulder. After that, we will act according to your decision. Choose wisely. And then she was gone, leaving the most powerful beings in the galaxy to contemplate something they had never considered before, the possibility that power could be used for something other than control, the possibility that they could change, and the terrifying uncertainty of not knowing what came next. The next 3 days were the longest in council history. Dr. Kraus presented humanities terms in a formal session on the second day. They were simpler than anyone expected. First, council would publicly acknowledge the 73 species it had destroyed over 11,000 years. Their names would be spoken. Their histories would be shared. The archives humanity had preserved would be opened to the entire galaxy. Second, the client species would be given true freedom. No more secret controls. No more technology restrictions. No more quiet manipulation to ensure they never became powerful enough to challenge the council. Real sovereignty. Real independence. Real choice. Third, the council itself would change. No more hidden sessions. No more secret votes. No more Dominion protocols that allowed entire species to be enslaved or erased. Transparency, accountability, laws that applied to everyone, even the powerful. And if we refuse? Velkoth asked. His voice was tired. He had not slept in 2 days. Dr. Cross did not blink. Then we release the archives ourselves. Every species in the galaxy learns what you have done. Every client state discovers how they have been kept weak on purpose. Every treaty with hidden clauses becomes public knowledge. Every lie you have told for 11,000 years gets exposed in a single moment. They might not believe you, Thessaly Vorn pointed out. But her voice lacked its usual confidence. They might not, Dr. Cross agreed. But enough will. And here is something you have forgotten over all these centuries of divide and conquer. She paused. You have spent so long making sure no species trusts any other. You have played everyone against everyone else for thousands of years. But you forgot that humans are really, really good at making friends. She let that sink in. Right now, as we speak, human ambassadors are meeting with representatives from 47 different species. Some are client states you thought were under your control. Some are species you thought were too weak to matter. Some are factions within your own governments who have been waiting for this moment. The council chamber was silent. We are not alone in this, counselors. We never were. The council fragmented into factions. The Kishari Dominion was the loudest. Their entire economy depended on being the council's enforcers. Their warrior caste existed to fight. To submit now would destroy their way of life. Thessaly Vorn argued for immediate attack, despite the risks. Better to die fighting than to live in a universe where their power meant nothing. The Meridian Collective disagreed. Counselor Thane had run probability calculations continuously since the humans first arrived. Every scenario they could see led to the same conclusion. War with humanity had less than a 12% chance of success. Those were terrible odds, worse than anything the Council had faced in 5,000 years. The Dralith Imperium was torn apart from within. Velkoth had ruled his species with an iron claw for centuries, but he was not the only voice. Younger members of his government had been asking uncomfortable questions for decades. Questions about the old records that did not match. Questions about species that seemed to have vanished without explanation. Questions that Velkoth had always silenced. Now those questions could not be silenced anymore. On the third day, something unexpected happened. Counselor Thane requested a private meeting with Marcus Chen, the young human cultural liaison who had spent most of the crisis. Quietly observing and taking notes, they met in a small meditation chamber away from the chaos of the main debates. Thane's crystalline form pulsed with colors that Marcus had never seen before. Colors that suggested confusion, curiosity, and something that might have been hope. You are not a diplomat, Thane said. It was not a question. No, Marcus agreed. Dr. Cross is our strategist. Colonel Okonkwo is our warning. I am something else. What? I am a historian. Specifically, I study how civilizations fail. Thane was quiet for a long moment. Their energy patterns shifted and swirled inside their crystal container. You believe the Council is failing? Marcus shook his head. I believe the Council already failed. 11,000 years ago, when you decided that fear was more efficient than trust, when you chose control over cooperation, when you looked at other species and saw threats instead of possibilities, that is, harsh, it is accurate. Marcus leaned forward, and his young face was serious. But here's the thing about humans. We are really bad at accepting that failure has to be permanent. What do you mean? I mean that every civilization that has ever existed has made mistakes. Some of those mistakes were terrible. Some caused suffering that lasted for generations. But civilizations can learn. Civilizations can change. That is what makes them different from the species that create them. He paused. Individuals die. Governments fall. But the idea of something better can survive anything. Thane considered this. You truly believe the Council can become something different? After 11,000 years? I believe people can change. Even people who have spent thousands of years telling themselves they cannot. Marcus shrugged. Besides, destroying you would be easy. Boring even this. He gestured at nothing in particular, but somehow indicated everything. This is actually interesting. Your species is insane, Thane said. But their energy patterns had shifted to something warmer, something almost amused. Absolutely, Marcus agreed with a smile. But we are honest about it. And we think maybe you are tired of pretending to. Thane did not respond immediately. They floated in silence, their crystalline form catching light and breaking it into rainbows. Finally, they spoke. For 3,000 years, I have seen probability streams that showed our current path ending in destruction. I told the council. They did not listen. They never listen. They believe that power makes them immune to consequences. And what do you believe? I believe... Thane hesitated. I believe that for the first time in 3,000 years, I can see probability streams that lead somewhere other than darkness. The vote came on the 7th day. It was not unanimous. The Kashari Dominion voted against reform. Their economy, their identity, their entire reason for existence depended on the old ways. 2 other species sided with them, too afraid of what change might bring. But 9 species voted in favor. 9 species looked at humanity's terms and chose a different path. And in that moment, 11,000 years of careful control began to crack. Velkoth watched the vote count and felt something he had not felt in centuries. He was not sure what to call it. It was uncomfortable. It was frightening. It might have been hope. He cast his vote for reform, and the galaxy held its breath. The announcement shattered 11,000 years of careful illusion across the galaxy. The archives were opened. Species that had been told they were alone learned of others like them. Client states that had accepted their lesser status discovered it had been manufactured. Histories that had been erased were restored. Names that had been forbidden were spoken again. 73 names. 73 species that had lived and laughed and loved and been destroyed because they became inconvenient. The Alani, who had created music so beautiful it could heal wounded souls. The Forgotten Ones, who had built cities that floated on clouds. The Builders, who had given humanity the gift of knowledge and the burden of responsibility. All of them remembered at last. It was not a clean transition. It could never be clean. There was too much pain, too much anger. Too many centuries of hurt that had been suppressed and denied, and twisted into something poisonous. There were protests on 100 worlds, riots in 3 star systems. Former client species demanding justice for crimes that had been committed before their grandparents were born. Old alliances crumbling as secrets came to light. The Kashari Dominion refused to accept the vote. Dessily Vorn declared that her species would never bow to human manipulation. She mobilized her fleets, gathered her warriors, and prepared for the war she had always known was coming. But something strange happened. Not all of her. Warriors followed, 16% of Kashari captains. The ones that Colonel Okonkwo had mentioned chose a different path. They remembered the promises of honor their species had abandoned. They remembered what the Kishari were supposed to be before they became the Council's attack dogs. They refused to fight for a cause they no longer believed in, and they were not alone. Ships began appearing along the border. Not human ships, or not just human ships. Meridian energy vessels, their crystalline forms pulsing with unified purpose. Relary destroyers, crewed by beings who had been servants for 5,000 years and had finally decided they were done serving. Draeleth carriers, whose captains had looked at the old records and found the truth their leaders had hidden. Even stone speakers. The slow and patient beings who had not taken action in 2,000 years sent representatives. They had watched. They had waited. And now they were ready to move. Dr. Helena Cross stood on the observation deck of humanity's flagship. It was a vessel called the Humble Suggestion, a name chosen with the dry humor that humans found so amusing. Through the viewport, she could see the fleet forming around her. It was not a human fleet anymore. It was something new, something that had never existed before. Colonel Okonkwo joined her at the viewport. The Kashari are holding position. They have not attacked yet. They will not attack, Dr. Cross said with quiet confidence. Thessaly Vorn is a warrior, but she is not stupid. She can count the ships as well as we can. And if she decides to fight anyway, then we will stop her. But I do not think it will come to that. Dr. Cross watched a group of Dreamkeeper vessels take position alongside a formation of human frigates. The Dreamkeepers had been one of the Council's most reliable supporters for 8,000 years. Their presence in this new fleet meant more than any military advantage. You planned for this, Okonkwo said. It was not a question. We planned for 17 different failure scenarios. If the Council had chosen immediate attack, we had contingencies. If they had tried to assassinate us in the chamber, we had contingencies. If they had doubled down on the Dominion Protocol and united against us, we had contingencies. But you hoped for this. Dr. Cross was quiet for a long moment. Through the viewport, she could see the distant light of Nexus Prime. The Great Council Chamber was still there, still the heart of galactic civilization. But it was no longer a prison. It was no longer a place where secrets were kept and species were condemned. It was becoming something else, something better. I hoped that people could surprise us, she finally admitted. That even after 11,000 years of making the wrong choice, they could still make a different one. She smiled, and for the first time in months, the smile reached her eyes. It turns out we were not the only ones tired of being afraid. Marcus Chen entered the observation deck, tablet in hand as always. He looked exhausted, but happy. He had been coordinating cultural exchanges between species that had never been allowed to communicate before. It was chaotic work. It was also the most important work of his life. The first Reformed Concord session is scheduled for next month, he reported. 47 species have confirmed representatives. Even some of the Kishari moderate factions are sending observers. He paused. Counselor Thane has agreed to share their probability projections with everyone. No more secret knowledge, Dr. Cross nodded. And the archives? Being distributed as we speak? Every species that was destroyed will be remembered. Every crime will be acknowledged. Marcus hesitated. Some of the council members are struggling with it. Velkoth especially. He keeps reading the names of the species his ancestors destroyed. Good, Dr. Cross said softly. That is how change begins. Not with grand gestures, but with small moments of recognition. Small admissions that things were not right. On the viewport display, another group of ships joined the fleet. These were Kashari vessels, but they flew different colors. The colors of the old honor codes. Before the council corrupted everything. Thessaly. Vorn's hardliners were increasingly isolated. Colonel Okonkwo studied the tactical display. We should log the date, she said. This is the beginning of something significant. Dr. Cross considered this. Call it the beginning of the Concord Reformation. Okonkwo raised an eyebrow. Not the human victory? Dr. Cross laughed. It was a genuine sound, surprised out of her by the question. That is the thing about real change, Sarah. It is never really about winning. It is not about defeating your enemies, or proving you were right all along. She gestured at the fleet outside. Ships from a dozen species working together for the first time in living memory. Beings who had been taught to fear each other, learning to trust instead. It is about showing everyone that something different is possible, and then getting out of the way while they build it. The communications panel lit up with incoming messages, requests for alliance, offers of cooperation, questions about how to join this new thing that was being born. Marcus looked at the flood of messages and smiled. It is going to take forever to answer all of these. Then we had better get started, Dr. Cross said. She turned from the viewport and walked toward the communications center. There was work to do. A galaxy to rebuild. A future to create. Behind her, through the observation windows, the combined fleet continued to grow as more and more species made their choice. The old council had ruled through fear and control. The new Concord would be built on something else, hope. Trust, the radical belief that people could be better than they had been, it would not be easy. It would not be fast. There would be setbacks and disappointments, and moments when everything seemed possible. But humans were good at impossible things, and now they were not alone. Across the galaxy, 73 names were spoken for the first time in thousands of years, and in the spaces between stars, something new began to grow. Something that had been sleeping for 11,000 years, waiting for someone brave enough to wake it. Something that the old council had tried to destroy again and again, and never quite managed to kill. Hope. It was spreading through the galaxy, like fire through dry grass, and nothing would ever be the same again.